operations at the New York City Housing Authority. We have sign language interpreters for the hearing impaired on the stage and Spanish, Russian, and Chinese translators for those that need it in the audience. Will the interpreters please come to the microphone to identify yourselves?
Ofrecemos servicios de interpretación en español. Si necesitan, por favor, de salir al lobby para recibir el equipo de audio. Muchas gracias.
Добрый вечер, переводчик русского языка Ирина. Пожалуйста, если у вас есть какие-то вопросы, обращайтесь в правую часть нашего зала.
大會今晚有安排廣東話嘅翻譯服務，有需要嘅人士請出外領取耳機。大會今晚有安排國語的翻譯服務，有需要人士請出外領取耳機，謝謝。
Remington Low Chinese interpreter 羅明登翻譯廣東話。
The purpose of this town hall meeting is to share with you the final components of the New York City Housing Authority Mixed Finance Modernization Plan to secure ongoing federal funding for the long-term capital and operating needs of the 21 city and state-built developments. Federalization, or the Mixed Finance Modernization Plan, will provide for certain immediate and necessary rehabilitation work at these 21 developments. It will also ensure additional dedicated funds for all 334 Nycha developments. That means more money to pay for the things that your development needs to keep the buildings operating safely and soundly. The purpose of the town hall meeting tonight is for you to hear how the efforts will improve your development and preserve public housing for the future. Tonight, we will have the following Nycha representatives here on the dais to hear and answer your questions. They are Nycha Chairman John B. RHEA, Vice Chairman Earl Andrews Jr., Commissioner Margarita Lopez, General Manager Michael P. Kelly, and Deputy General Manager for Operations Gloria Finkelman. We hope that as many people as possible will have an opportunity to provide comments this evening. So before we begin, let's go over the following ground rules. If you wish to speak, first you must fill out a speaker's slip. They are available in the entrance area at the table marked Speaker Sign-In. Please line up at each of the microphones in the center aisles and wait your turn to speak. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes to speak. On the stage, you will see a timer with 3 lights. When you begin to speak, the green light will be on and the timer will begin to count down. When the yellow light is lit, it means that you should start to conclude your remarks. When the red light is turned on, your 3 minutes to provide comments are over. A table has been set up outside so the written comments may also be submitted. Numbered speaker slips are non-transferable, and you are not present or do not wish to speak with your name and number is called, you will forfeit the opportunity to speak. The hearing is being recorded and transcribed by a stenographer, so please speak only from the microphone in the aisles and identify yourself and your development or affiliation. Remember, we are here to discuss the Mixed Finance Modernization Plan. Any personal comments on criticism of or oral attacks on Nycha personnel, resident representatives, and public attendees, or any demeaning, discriminatory, or ethnic slurs or vulgar language will not be tolerated. I, as the moderator, and this evening's meeting, reserve the right to immediately move on to the next speaker online if any comments are deemed inappropriate. The moderator on the stage is in charge of the town hall. Please be considerate of your neighbors and obey the moderator's directions. We are here to consider issues that are of concern to everyone, not issues that concern only a single resident or individual. If you have an issue that concerns only you or your apartment, we have tables set up outside specifically for those purposes. You may find out a resident response form at the table. You may fill out a resident response form at the table marked resident complaints. The passing out of materials, photo taking, video recording are not allowed in the auditorium. However, a general information station is available outside where leaflets and flyers may be displayed. Resource tables have been set up outside with information so that at the end of the meeting you can pick up information that may be interest to you on resident employment services, fair housing, social services, citywide programs, health providers, and information on the census. With that being said, let me introduce John B. RHEA, Chairman of the New York City Housing Authority.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here this evening, and I appreciate everybody taking time out of your schedules to join us. And it's really good to be up here on the stage with my fellow leadership team and Commissioner Lopez and Vice Chairman Andrews, General Manager Kelly, who many of you have had the chance to meet already, and Deputy General Manager Gloria Finkelman. We are pretty excited about the opportunity that's presented itself related to the federalization opportunity. You know, I think I originally started to communicate with many of the leadership, tenant leaders in November about the possibility of making federalization a reality. This is a topic that has been discussed for quite some time, for the better part of a decade, on how to ensure that these 21 city and state developments that are just like every other Nycha development around the city, you know, filled with wonderful tenants who make New York City the wonderful place it is, but who didn't seem to get the same fair shake that the rest of the developments were getting in terms of the support that they deserve for both capital improvements as well as ongoing operating maintenance and support to ensure that they'll be around for another 75 years. And a lot of people worked hard to try various ways to make the federalization a possibility. And as those of you who've been through the wars know, that was everything from judicial relief to try and get the courts to attach some form of support to the development, to legislatively in Washington, and then now through this transactional approach. And the other, despite a lot of hard work on the parts of many, and particularly Senator Chuck Schumer and Congresswoman Velasquez, who've been working on this for more than a decade, please. They deserve a round of applause. They absolutely do. But they actually were extremely instrumental into getting us to where we are today. If it weren't for the two of them, not only would we not have built the kind of momentum around this federalization effort, but the money that's been put into the budget in Washington to support the federalization would not have been a reality. So I know so many people have worked hard, and this morning I was with many of your leaders from the Citywide Council of Presidents, including Reginald Bowman, and he really gave you know, some background here on how hard people have worked for a long time to try and make this federalization a reality. So I'm excited tonight because we're here to say that we will have federalization for these 21 city and state developments. Not just that we are proposing it and we're pursuing it, but that it is actually a reality. This morning we had a press conference in which the mayor, along with Senator Schumer and Congresswoman Velasquez and the governor, Assemblyman Lopez and Speaker Silver, and in the Senate, leadership Sampson and Daniel Squadron, we were all there together to announce what is really a historic day in terms of getting what will amount to, just to put it in perspective, the 20,000 plus units in the 21 city and state developments with over 40,000 residents would be the third largest housing authority in the country on a standalone basis. I want to repeat that. It would be the third largest housing authority if it was a housing authority on its own. The New York, then Chicago, and then this entity. So it's very important that you know, we recognize and we take a minute and reflect on why it's been such a challenge to get these units federalized and to get funding for them, and it's because it requires a substantial amount of money on an annual basis to be put into the appropriations budget in Washington to support them. And given that it benefits New York and not any other states, that's a tough thing to get through a legislative process in Washington. And so we owe a lot to those of you who fought really hard for it and to those who were able to get appropriation funding for it. And so we celebrated or announced this morning that we were doing this, and the whole purpose of it is to ensure that public housing is preserved in New York City. Without preserving these 20,000 units, it runs the risk of not being able to preserve all of public housing in New York. And there are obvious reasons for that. First and foremost, having to drain money away from other developments to support the 21 city and state developments just means that the entire public housing portfolio within New York is not receiving the resources it needs to be preserved. And as I've said from the day that I was lucky enough to be appointed by the mayor, the number one risk to public housing in New York is not that people don't believe that it has value, it's that if we don't get enough money to continue to maintain the buildings, then ultimately the preservation is at risk because the buildings aren't being maintained. And we've seen that happen in other places in the country, throughout the country. So this is about preservation first and foremost. And I said that this morning. It's about ensuring that the families who live in these 20,000 plus units can maintain their residency and be proud of the place that they live in because it's getting the investments and the resources in terms of ongoing maintenance and staffing that it needs. It's about innovation because we had to find a way out of the ordinary, traditional way to ensure that there was support for these buildings from a financial standpoint and to raise the money that is going to go immediately into investing in these buildings today. And that's the mixed financing modernization program in which we had to put both public dollars with private dollars in order to invest in the rehabilitation work. And it's about collaboration. There are a lot of people, as I said, who really should deserve all the credit for being able to get the federalization over the finish line. In addition to the elected officials, you know, a lot of advocates, housing advocates have been supportive of this, came into the process early to understand and ensure that residents' rights would be protected. And also there are a lot of partners across the city. The state had to pass legislation in order to facilitate this. After the state passed the legislation, the governor had to sign it. We also needed a lot of help from our partners in city government. HDC, the Housing Development Corporation, is helping us issue the financing, as well as Housing Preservation and Development, and then also the private sector, Citibank, City Community Capital, that's putting up not only $200 million of tax credit equity into the transaction, but is also providing other support for the credit. So a lot of people, a lot of entities had to collaborate to make this happen, not the least of which is the Nycha team that's worked really hard to make sure that this happened. And this morning, to emphasize how important this was, the Secretary of HUD, Sean Donovan, was here in New York to announce this and to sign the documents to make this a reality. And he was here basically representing President Obama, and he was here to discuss why this has been so important to invest in public housing in this administration in Washington, and that given that President Obama got to start organizing in public housing in Chicago, one of his first commitments was to ensure that public housing is preserved across the country, and to demonstrate that by actually speaking with the most powerful way he can, which is to ensure that there's money available and that he put the best person in the job to in HUD, in Sean Donovan, to ensure that we have the kind of support and understanding in Washington that New Yorkers need, and particularly residents of public housing. So a lot of people at the highest levels of this country are basically supporting this effort. And when things like this happen, it's worth us taking a minute to know that, you know, it's only because of the hard work of so many of the 400,000 people who live in public housing demanding and advocating for support that gets us to this point. And I think, you know, I'm not here to preach, but I am here to kind of give credit where it's due. And it's really due to each and every one of you in this room and the members of public housing who have fought this long battle for quite some time. It's interesting that Reggie Bowman said something earlier today at the press conference. He said it was a year ago, about a year ago today, which was before I arrived, that a similar group was organized or gathered at Rutgers houses where the press conference was this morning, and which is one of the developments that's going to benefit from the federalization. And he mentioned that the group was organized to go down to Washington and demand additional resources to support Nycha and public housing in New York. And it's great to be able to stand here a year later and to say that your voices were heard. So with that, I want to get into the specific slides and talk about what it means and what it doesn't mean. But what it certainly means is that your voices have been heard, and your leadership is working hard to try to make a difference in your daily lives. So I'm going to need you to turn this on. It's gone off.
Andy Nagy?
Okay, yeah. I see a gentleman with his hand up. Can you just hold your question? We're going to get the questions in a little bit, so we'll thanks. So I know I met with many of you in various forums to discuss this throughout the process. We started this effort back in the late summer to try to understand whether or not the stimulus legislation that was passed by President Obama created an opportunity for us to get the 21 city and state developments federalized. So we started this work at the very early stages just to understand whether or not legally there was an opportunity to use the stimulus funding to facilitate the federalization effort. And so we started this conversation then, and since that time there's been a series of meetings with various interested parties, elected tenant leadership, as well as tenant with the residents of the affected developments, and we had a larger town hall meeting where all of Nycha was invited to understand what we were proposing. So I know for many of you, this won't be the first time you've seen this information, and I'm going to try to go through it quickly so we can get to the questions that are on your mind. But as I said, it's the stimulus legislation, the Recovery Act, that provided a one-time exception that would allow Nycha to get the city and state developments into the HUD funding formula. And the reason is there's a limitation on adding new public housing to the funding formula. It's called the Faircloth Amendment, and it prohibits housing authorities from adding new units to the funding formula, and therefore Nycha could not take the units in the 21 city and state developments and add them into the federal funding formula. But the stimulus legislation basically said money could be spent to preserve, rehabilitate, and acquire new housing, and that the limitations that the Faircloth Amendment had actually wouldn't apply. And so that's the most important element of this, is that President Obama's and the Congress's Stimulus Act provided a one-time opportunity for the federalization to take place. But it also said that the stimulus dollars had to be spent, obligated, committed on the same timelines that the rest of the stimulus money had to be spent, which means we had to have it fully obligated, committed in contracts by March 17th of this year, so a couple of days from now, Wednesday, and then it has to all be spent by March of 2012. So we have 2 years in order to do all of the rehabilitation work. And so that put us under a very tight timeline in order to get the federalization approved before March 17th. If we didn't get this done by Wednesday, then we would have lost the one-time opportunity and it wasn't coming back. So we were under very, very tight deadlines. It also said that there need to be a minimum of at least $2,000 spent on average per apartment in order for it to qualify as substantial rehabilitation work, as they define rehab work. As we'll go through, we worked really hard with HUD to make sure that they didn't mean we literally had to spend $2,000 in each apartment, because if we did, there's just no way we could get this work done in 2 years. We would have to, go into people's apartments, in some cases ask people to, move out. We knew that that was not logistically possible in the 2-year time frame. And so we were able to get HUD to agree that as long as we spent $2,000 on average, when you divided the number of apartments into the buildings, and we spent, the money on the buildings, that would qualify as $2,000 per apartment. So if there's 1,000 units in a development and we have to do $2,000 per apartment, we have to spend $2 million on that development in order for it to qualify. So we immediately decided to focus on things that would not ask you or require you to move out of your apartment, but there would be things that everyone would benefit from, like elevators, like roof jobs, like brickwork, like plumbing and heating systems that obviously we could get the work done on the appropriate timeline. And then lastly, that all of the units, in order to be accepted into the portfolio and to be funded, would have to meet HUD's minimum physical condition standards. And that meant, that's basically how we made a decision on what work we were going to do at what buildings, because as you all know, there's a fast scoring process that tells us, what at those buildings need to be done in order to receive a passing grade. And so because we had recently done the FADS work, we were able to go building by building and understand what work needed to be done in order to get them up to acceptable standards to be part of the federal portfolio. So those were the requirements that we had to meet. Obviously, all very challenging to make them all mesh together. We set some basic requirements from the beginning. When we looked at this, we said it's very important that we not do anything that actually jeopardizes the status of tenants or that in any way jeopardizes the long-term status of these buildings as low-income, affordable public housing. And so we set out a couple of requirements for ourselves in order to pursue this as a reasonable plan. The first one is that, that your rights needed to be protected. We wanted to make sure that no one was relocated as part of this process and that families would continue to benefit as public housing residents with all the protections that they are used to, whether that be rent schedules or other protections in terms of your tenancy. Secondly, we needed to know that the private money that we would bring into and the private partners who would participate in this process would be committed to public housing as you all know it, and not ask us to convert it into something different, and to recognize that what we needed was capital from them and their commitment to preservation. And so we went out to 3 different banking institutions, and ultimately, as you'll hear, we settled on city community capital, both because of how aggressive they were with respect to the funding sources that they would provide us on terms that were favorable to Nycha, but also on a fundamental commitment to New York City and a fundamental commitment to maintaining these units as low-income, affordable housing. We also said that Nycha had to remain the operating entity responsible for maintaining these developments on a day-to-day basis, so that from a resident's perspective, nothing changes. The people that you're used to working with in your development, the kind of expectations that you have in terms of knowing who to deal with wouldn't change. It wouldn't be some new private company coming in. And so we wanted to make sure that that was one of the requirements and that it was seamless to each of you. And then lastly, that all of the workers be protected. You know, obviously, Nycha has almost 12,000 employees that basically show up every day and work hard to ensure that public housing is preserved in New York City. And it's very important to me and to everyone on this team and to our partners in the unions that they continue to be long-term responsible for doing the important work that they do. I'm happy to say that all of these requirements have been met, and when we get into the Q&A and as I go through the rest of the presentation, we can discuss that more. The transaction has been basically structured in 2 portfolios. We had to create a new entity that would own the buildings in order for us to be able to put public money together with private money, and that's why it's called a mixed financing. HUD requires us to take not just the stimulus money that they provided to us, but also that we would take that stimulus money and put it together with other private dollars in the form of a mixed financing transaction in order for it to be eligible for federalization. And so we had to meet that requirement, and so we had to create new entities in order to own these buildings. So Nycha is actually selling the buildings into this new entity. We're maintaining ownership of the land outright, and then we created limited partnerships in which the buildings will be acquired by the limited partnership, in which, as I said, Nycha is the managing partner of the partnership and responsible for operating the developments going forward. 2 partnerships. One partnership is a partnership that has the benefits of tax credits in it, and another partnership that didn't require tax credits, and that just has to do with the amount of investment that was required in the different portfolios. The buildings, as I said, will be sold to to these partnerships, not the land. The land will basically remain in Nycha's direct control, and we'll lease the land to the partnerships that own the buildings, so that by definition the buildings have the right to operate on the land that they sit. But it's protection for you, it's protection for Nycha, that we own the land outright, and it's just one more protection in the deal to ensure that the Public Housing Authority is the owner and controlling agent of these entities. Secondly, that we will put $250 million of money immediately to improve these buildings. You will begin to see that work commence in the next few weeks with sidewalk sheds going up and other activity mobilizing at your developments to begin the work over the months to come. And we estimate that $212 million of that money is coming directly from Citigroup, City Community Capital, as part of their investment in these developments. And then lastly, we needed to ensure that Nycha long-term had the right to buy these buildings back at the end of the partnership period, so that once the city received its tax benefits for investing in these buildings, we could dissolve the partnership, reacquire the buildings outright, and that we had that right and that no one else could come in and buy the buildings from us. And so that is part of the development of the agreement as well. Where are we? I kind of took you through a little bit of that already. We got local, at the state level, the governor signed the bill into law, which allowed us to transfer these buildings into the partnership. The State Division of Housing and Community Renewal, which had to approve it, had to look at the transaction and the structure, and had to look at the implication on residents and whether or not it was going to continue to preserve these as public low-income housing. It had to look at all of the elements of this deal and give its blessing that what Nycha was proposing was indeed going to do that. And so the Department of Housing and Community Renewal at the state level has signed off on this, ensuring that it does all of the things that it is intended to do. And you should know that the legislation that was passed in in Albany, also had a lot of protections in there, explicit language to ensure, again, that these buildings are preserved as low-income housing for the next 75 years and beyond. And HUD today, as I said, signed off on the ACC contract, which allows the buildings to be federalized and for many of the units to receive its own dedicated funding. Where do we end up? We strongly believe we end up with one Nycha, 334 developments that are federal public housing developments in New York City. No longer 313 of them that are public housing, federal public housing, and 21 that are city and state. All 334 are federal public housing with all of the protections that affords its residents. Additionally, we believe that we will be able to modernize your developments with additional money that we wouldn't have received if we hadn't pursued this mixed financing transaction. In addition to the $108 million that's coming in from the stimulus money, we're raising another $303 million that's going to go to these developments, and that will not only do the capital work that I'm telling you about here today, but also that will fund reserves and other operating costs that will ensure that your developments are well maintained going forward. So it's about modernizing, it's about preserving, and ultimately it's about maintaining them going forward at a standard that we all strive for. One of the other things that this does is that immediately it will qualify 11,743 apartment units for direct federal subsidy. Right now, we have, within the 21 city and state developments, they're 20,000 plus units, a couple thousand of which have been converted to Section 8, and therefore they have a funding stream attached to them. But 18,000 of them actually have no funding stream, and that's why you heard us talk about the $90 million of operating costs that we don't receive any support for. That was the 18,000 units that don't have any support. Annually, that costs Nycha about $90 million that we don't receive from anyone. So getting almost 12,000 of those 18,000 units a funding source is a big, big deal. And it basically equates to between $65 and $75 million a year. Every year from now on, we will receive to support the 21 city and state developments. So we wanted 90 million. We didn't quite get all the way there, but we got a long way there in terms of between 65 and 75 million of additional funding. It also, though, the 6,000 units that didn't get the federal funding, we are working with HUD to ensure that they do have a long-term funding stream. And I obviously had a number of conversations with HUD to give us confidence that they're committed to a full solution for all of these developments, for all of these units, because now that all 21 are in the federal portfolio, we have a real path to ensure that the 6,000 units that don't have funding will also have funding in the next year or two. We know it's going to take us a little time to get there, but HUD is committed to work with us to do it. So we have a plan for all 20,000 plus units in these 21 developments to have funding. And it protects and preserves all of the rights of each and every one of the residents, and that, again, there's no one that will be asked to move out as a result of this. People also want to know that, that it's still going to be for low-income residents. And what we can tell you is that not only will all of your tenancy rights be maintained and you'll not be asked to move for any reason related to the federalization, but when new units come available in these developments because someone moves out, the actual the test on whether they have low-income status actually is going to be tougher than it is today. So going forward, you can't be over 60% of the AMI, the area median income, in order to come into public housing in these developments. So this is actually not only protecting it as low-income housing, but it's actually made the standards around the test even more stringent in terms of people being able to meet that requirement. So we feel very strongly that we've met the commitments that we've put forward. We think that the benefits are clear. It maintains long-term control of these developments by Nycha, so we're not privatizing. Nycha is still in control of these developments. It is still public housing, and the public authority that's responsible for ensuring that and the preservation of them will continue to be Nycha. We will invest $108 million, as I said, from stimulus money, and in addition to the stimulus money, we found a way to leverage that with private and other public money. So in addition to the money that's coming in privately from city community capital, we also were able to get the state to put up $42 million of money for this transaction in modernization money, which was about to expire. And we were able to take cumulative years of modernization money and pull it from the state and put into this opportunity. And that's going into what we're doing as well. So money that wouldn't be available to Nycha normally is being made available to Nycha through the federalization transaction. And then ultimately that money will be used to immediately improve the physical condition of the buildings to ensure that we can comply with HUD's standards. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. And I know Mr. Spence will come up and take us through that process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our first speaker, Ms. Paulette Johnson, I believe you're right up here.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Paulette. I've been in Housing Authority since 5 months, almost 53 years. I've seen the best of administration and the worst. It sounds good. You candy coated all the problems we have about the monies that we're receiving. But who's going to oversee this money? Because from my understanding, over a year ago, Obama put in $326 million for elevator renovations I haven't seen yet to come. I'm living at a point now that I'm disabled. I had a car accident. I have 3 children and I'm caring for in an apartment building where some tenants have 61 mice running around. Elevators are out. 81-year-old tenants are walking upstairs. Management, instead of hearing the problems of the tenant, I watched and seen our manager in Ford Independent Houses take a 92-year-old lady and have her taken out of her office in handcuffs. This is not supposed to happen. You see, I've been around for a very long time. I just lost my husband a year ago. And we've been in housing since I turned 18 in 1976. I live in Carver. There's been better administration that considered us as tenants when we have problems. It should have never got to this point where it's been ignored. And now we're at a point now with new management. But what about all the problems we had over the years that we just pushed under the rug? I was out in a system with the education where we had problems. We were fortunate enough to have people like Mr. Robert Jackson who fought and got everything for these public school children, and I'm an advocate for them. But where was all the support we needed over the years? And how are we going to believe that this money is going to come directly to the elevators, to the mice, to the fact that I can't even get in and out the entrance of my building after several complaints, and the manager, instead of doing it professionally, which they need to train some of these maintenance workers as professionals, instead of coming back every month to clear my tub and to put tar down on a broken sidewalk that I nearly got flipped out of my wheelchair, and one tenant got his leg broken. What we need is someone to oversee this money and oversees the administration that's running these developments, because we're talking to deaf ears, because we're not getting anything we need. We're paying our rent. My manager takes the tenants out in her car to go to make sure they pay their rent every month. That's not her job description. She doesn't even make a walk through the building to see the ceiling falling down. Elderly tenants living in apartments who don't come down to make complaints, with ceilings falling in, with sidewalks broken up, with garbage look like outside my door one day it was grass growing. We don't deserve this, not at all. And what I want to know is who's going to oversee the money, okay? Because it's all good we getting it, but who's going to make sure it gets there?
So first of all, sorry to hear the loss of your husband, and I appreciate that you've been a stalwart, long-standing resident of public housing, and so many of you in this room have made your lives in public housing, and you have seen things change over time, and many of those changes have not been for the better. And I recognize that, and this management team up here recognizes that. The reason why I was so excited to stand in front of you today, and the reason why I was excited about taking the appointment when the mayor offered it to me, is because I believe there's an opportunity to change the performance of public housing and change the priorities that will allow public housing to thrive again in New York. Let me just put it in perspective, all right? A couple of things. Number one, 5 years ago, Nycha, as all public housing authorities, had to do what was called a comprehensive needs assessment, which means there was consultants hired to come in and analyze the status of the buildings and the repair or state of disrepair in public housing across the country. That study revealed that there was over $50 billion in unmet capital needs, repairs, on public housing across the country. And that in New York alone, that number for 5 years was $7.5 billion. We needed to invest $7.5 billion in public housing in New York in 5 years in order just to get it up to a maintenance standard that was appropriate. And I will tell you, just so you know, we get about $330 million a year. So you multiply that times 5, that's $1.5 billion. We need $7.5 billion, and we only get $1.5 billion. So think about the long-term implications of that, of not having anything close to what's needed in order to keep the buildings up. That's why you see ceilings falling in. That's why you see broken concrete. That's why you see defective elevators. It is fundamental. If you don't spend the money on it and you don't invest in it, it will not get better. It will get worse. Now, that was a policy decision of administrations in Washington who basically said that public housing wasn't a priority. And in many cities like Chicago and St. Louis and other places, they tore the buildings down and they moved residents. Okay, so what I said to you when I got on the stage is the #1 risk to public housing in New York is not whether or not we want it, it's whether or not we invest in it so that it will be maintained and preserved, or we don't. So we have a long period of time of underinvestment, and now we have a chance to begin cracking away at something that all of us in this room would agree is absolutely unacceptable. Now, you asked about elevators. I'm not sure which number you were quoting, but what we said last year is that when we came out with our elevator safety and maintenance program, we said that we would spend $110 million on elevators last year. 70 million, which came out of the stimulus package, and a little over 30+ million, almost 40 million, came from our normal capital fund to immediately address elevators, and I think it was 65 different developments, if my numbers are right. And we are on that plan to continue to make those improvements. In the Federalization plan, we'll actually fix elevators in 5 additional developments over the next 2 years as part of the plan. And we have $265 million in our 5-year capital plan to fix elevators beyond that. So we are spending a significant amount of the stimulus money, we're spending a significant amount of our normal capital plan, and we're spending a significant amount of the federalization capital that I just told you we're raising on elevators, because that is a priority, not only to keep you safe and secure, but to obviously ensure that your quality of life is improved by having operable, working elevators in your buildings. We got 3,300 elevators in Nycha buildings. In 2,600 buildings, we have 3,300 elevators. That takes a lot of money and a lot of time to get through fixing all of those elevators. Remember, in many of these buildings, there's single-car elevators. That means we have to take the elevator completely out of service, impact your lives in order to fix the elevator, replace it, rehab it, refurbish it. So we have to have a plan both financially that works, and we have to have a plan that logistically works, that deals with the reality of the impact on each of your lives. I know that, you know, it's easy for me to say that standing here when you have to live in buildings where the service is down, and we understand how that impacts your lives, and we're committed to improving that. And so elevators, whether you go on the website and look at our plan for our capital plan, whether you get the annual plan, you will see in the budgets and in the annual plan and in what's on the website that the elevators are a priority, and they have been identified, and we have money committed to fix them over the next coming years. But the numbers are big. They're staggering. $7.5 billion. The 5-year plan that the board just approved last week is $2.5 billion over the next 5 years. Okay, the $2.5 billion is like I said, the normal about 1.5 that we receive, because it's $300 million a year for 5 years, and it's because of extra money from stimulus, $423 million. It's because of the extra money from the federalization, over $300 million that I just talked about. It's because we're going to go out and do a bond deal. We're going for new, innovative ways to raise more money so we can get to a number of these projects faster than we would be able to do if we had to just wait strictly for the federal government to provide us with the money. So certainly, whether it be the city, the state that stopped funding these developments years ago, I told you that it was $90 million in operating costs that we have to basically make up for at the city and state developments because the city and state don't provide the funding that they used to. Over 10 years, that has cost us $1 billion. $1 billion in what has been both operating and lost capital money that the city and state historically provided that they didn't provide. You add that $1 billion up, and that's why you talk about, you know, not having enough staff to deal with the issues at your developments. You know, $90 million a year, you calculate that into the average wage of a NYCHA worker, that's thousands of people that are not on the NYCHA payroll to service your developments because we don't receive the operating support for those city and state developments that we will receive going forward. And the
working there that neglect the development. Like my manager, I find her in Lomans almost every day, but I've never seen her do a tour of my building.
Okay. Well, let me on behalf of NYCHA managers and on behalf of NYCHA employees, look, they're bad apples in every bunch, okay? But most people at NYCHA show up and work hard every day, and quite frankly, given that the staff used to be 15,000 and now it's down to less than 12,000, running the same buildings, you try to take that kind of number out of any jobs or things that you guys do in your daily lives. When you reduce the staff by that amount, things actually don't work the way they used to. So you may not see your manager walking through your buildings as often, and maybe because the staff that they used to have as housing assistants and doing other things are now no longer available to them, and so now they're doing work that somebody else used to be able to do, which gave them the capacity to do what you expect from them. So I'm not making excuses, but what I am saying is that without hiring appropriate level of staff to manage these buildings, they're labor intensive. You know, I mean, buildings require people to mop floors, screw in light bulbs, fix broken things, and if you don't have enough people, something is going to suffer. And so we believe strongly that the federalization, as well as other actions like this that will bring additional money to NYCHA, will go a long way to solving the problems that you're concerned about. And you ask who's going to oversee the money. My job is to oversee the money, and my CFO's job is to oversee the money and to make sure that we not only get the money, but that the money gets spent right. And you have my commitment to that.
Next speaker, one name, Mohammed, Red Hook West. That's number 2. Mohammed from Red Hook West. Speaker number 3, Jewel Bryant. Please.
Please do. Please take it just for the...
Well, what I want to ask you is, you say that you're going to be the one who's going to be giving out the money. And you're going to be overseeing the money. So what I want to know, are they going to fix the kitchens? Are they going to fix the bathrooms? Because we need new sinks, new tubs. Are they going to, is that money, is it going to be allocated for that? I live in a garden apartment, so there's only 3 stories to my building. I really understand how with the elevators, because we do have a problem with elevators, we have a problem with the mice, with the roaches, but and you cut staff, because staff has been cut. But I've lived in the projects for 21 years. I'm ready to leave because we're not getting any services. I had my sink fixed 5 years ago, and they never came in plastic. I mean, you try to call that 777 number, and that's something that don't make no sense. You can't get anything fixed. And then they take 3 months to 4 months to come, and then somebody has to come out and look at it. Then there's somebody else that has to come out and do the work. So this is a problem with that 77 number. This is ridiculous. This just doesn't make any sense.
So listen, I'm not here to tell you today that we have enough money to fix all the problems, right? If I wish that's what my message was. What I am, and I told you early on when I went through the numbers on what the money was being spent for and what it's not being spent for. Unfortunately, given as you look at a Nycha development, we have to protect the actual building before we can go into individual apartments. So investments in the bricks, investments in the roofs, investments in the plumbing and the heating, and investments in the elevators have to happen before we can go into individual apartments. So, you know, I know that, as I said to the mayor and as I said to Secretary Donovan, I said to City Council today, because we had our budget testimony today, I said that the things that will make the biggest impact on residents, which are their individual apartments, we are not being able to get through with this current funding. And we will be investing in boards. You can't buy a new boiler for $18,000, but I get your point. But I get your point. I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you, Ms. Bryant. Speaker number 4, Philip Price. Please come forward.
I'd like to thank you and I congratulate you.
Thank you.
You are the most articulate and the most charming chairman of the 4 chairmen that I've known. Ladies, isn't he a good-looking guy? Just a good-looking guy. Okay? Now, we're going to be real nice to Mr. RHEA.
Did my mother pay you to say that?
No. This guy did, the housing whistleblower.
Okay, all right.
I'm that guy.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I spoke to Constance Robathan. This retaliation against me to destroy my life, can it please stop? I'm a remaining family member. Right now, I've been beating up Byron Metakakis in Supreme Court so bad, this is for you. I just beat him up that fast.
You got it? Okay. So.
This is the rent strike orchestrated against Nycha. Because if we don't do that.
Okay. You should move to the next one.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have 1 minute and 40 seconds. 3 things. Number 1, the retaliation against the whistleblower. If an old lady is embezzled by an employee out of $20,858, Ricardo Elias Morales calls my boss, who I work for at a law firm, and tell me to tell them to leave alone. I left them alone, but you don't leave the old lady in the apartment with the gas stove on for 4 hours, and then you orchestrate a retaliation scheme against me with a containment apparatus that destroyed my life, cost my business over $4.5 million, $100,000 for antiques taken out of my home. I'm a Haitian French Orthodox Roman Catholic. I leave people alone. I don't bother anybody. But the kind of compassion that it takes to see what I'm seeing is just humane. It's nothing special. Another thing, criminal neglect. I don't understand this. You mean to tell me you got 2 lawyers in 2 different courts and both of them have a different story about an supposed exclusive senior development that is not? Another one. When you deceive the judges, you deceive the courts, and I bring that to you. The Veterans Administration asked Congressman Smith to call in state and federal law enforcement. Ida Smith says, you even got a call recently about Nyc Nys, where they said Nycha is conducting a form of redlining. Those 21 developments, I believe, were part of the Davis versus Nycha, that it was found that Nycha was conducting a form of redlining. Are we still on the same page here? And I'm done.
Mr. Price, we'll have somebody come over and speak to you. Okay, specific to your concerns. Speaker number 5, Carmen Quinones.
Hi, how are you?
Mike's coming.
My name is Carmen Quinones. Actually, I'm a former Democratic district leader for a lot of developments, which I still advocate everything. But I am from Douglas Houses. First, I want to tell you, welcome. And I'm sorry that you're getting beat up, but Nycha has done so much to people that we don't know who to believe anymore, which is sad. I want to tell you that, though, Gloria, hi, because you have always been very helpful to me. And Margarita Lopez, always there, presente. But what I want to tell you is that there are so many things wrong that people don't want to believe anything. That's where we're at here. I think that your presentation, beautiful. But even to get here, I couldn't even get down because my elevator was broke. So I had to come down 15 steps, get on the train, and come to see you, baby.
Okay, all right. So, listen, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
After my 2 minutes, you can tell me whatever you want.
No, I thought it was about elevators.
My concern is that we have a lot of seniors in our development, a lot. We also have a lot of youth. They don't know what to do. They have nothing to do, so they're loitering. They're hanging. Our seniors are scared to come out. They're scared to come out. These developments have become hazardous. Your elevators, I am so tired of them coming and putting a Band-Aid on that elevator and that Band-Aid falling off in 2 seconds. So I understand where you're going, and I know that we need the money because we too are underfunded in our development. We need more maintenance workers, and I hear you. All I'm just asking you is to bear with them, bear with everybody here, because everybody is not going to be nice. But I just want you to know that I'm here for you. We're here for you.
Thank you.
All right?
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you. And I mean that sincerely, for welcoming me. It's been great now. It's 8 months, so I've been on the job, and I've been out to a lot of developments, and I've been speaking with a lot of residents. And I know you're frustrated. I know that the standards and the quality and the preservation of Nycha developments aren't what they should be. At the same time, there are enough people to blame, right? And it's not all. We talked about, people who make funding decisions in Washington, people who decided that at the city and state level that this wasn't a priority versus other things that the cities and the states decided to spend money on. There are a whole lot of people that we can blame, but the key is how do we move forward together? So there's some important things that Nycha management can do. And there's some important work that we all need to do together. So for example, I was just looking at the elevator track record at Bushwick Houses in Brooklyn, which is one of the elevators that's in our targeted top 50 outages. And, you know, 75% of the causes for why those elevators are down are vandalism. So we go in, we look at what was the problem, how did it happen, diagnose it, and we track and record it. 75% of the time is because of vandalism. So we can spend as much money as we have on elevators, but if people are going to vandalize property, we can fix the doors. But if people are going to vandalize them, you know, no matter what we do, it's not going to change the outcome. So we need to partner. And you're going to hear a lot more about us coming to all of you and saying, okay, how do we protect the safety and security of our buildings? How do we get youth who've been disconnected, reconnected, both in terms of activities? You know, we don't receive any money for our community centers and for the programming that we run at Nycha. We don't receive a dime for that from the federal government or for the state. We've been lucky that which I know residents are upset about, 25 of the centers we had to turn over to DYCD, Department of Youth and Community Development, but that was just so we could get, you know, City Council to help step up and provide some funding and contract out some services on 25 of them. But we don't receive a dime from the federal government or for anyone to operate the program. So we're working really hard to go out to not-for-profits and philanthropic organizations to get them to commit millions of dollars to our programming in our communities. So we're trying to think out of the box and do things differently to ensure that there are more resources for our youth and that are very important. Part of the vandalism issues, you know, look, everybody, you know, is not a criminal. Some people are youth, they do things they shouldn't be doing. They ought to be focused on things that are productive and positive. We have to make investments in these communities to keep them healthy beyond just the bricks and the mortar and fixing the elevators. We got to fix the attitudes, and we got to fix people taking pride in where they live. We're going to need your help. So you'll hear a lot more about that, and I'll be reaching out to you and to all of you who want to make a contribution in that area, because it is about not just the physical piece, but about us owning our communities. Other questions?
Speaker number 6, Paul Chu. Down front.
My name is Paul, last name C-H-O-U, Joe. I live in the 30 Avenue D. That before is very terrible location. Now it's changed, become very good. The police department always send the police go there, go around, check out everything. And now I was talking about my personal problem. I have stroke and disability. So one time the fire engine come, I don't know. I didn't hear. And then I had, you know, disability. Like a fire engine come, I couldn't go down by elevator, by stairway. By stairway, no bar. Only one side. Another side, no. I have suggestion. Put another side of the steel pipe. That's the first suggestion. And like a disability, best way living in the first floor or second floor. The easy escape. Because the fire come, you never know, 1, 2, 3. Because I saw many fire before, somebody get hurt.
Sure.
So that make me scared.
Okay.
But that location is a good location now.
Okay, so Mr. Chu. So I'm sure everybody heard that Mr. Chu has a disability. He lives in a building where he, because of his disabilities, had trouble hearing the fire trucks coming, and you know, he's concerned about his own safety, but obviously other people in similar situations. So 2 things. One is, I just had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the senior management team with the new commissioner of FDNY, Fire Department New York. And as you guys know, there have been a couple of fires recently in Nycha developments where there were, you know, could have been avoided. Each of those fires were human error. Someone smoking in bed, a child playing with matches, which is the way most fires happen. And so they can be prevented, first and foremost. So we're going to be working on a real big campaign to really deal with fire prevention in Nycha developments. Secondly,
y no tenía el problema tengo problema con la calefacción. Yo comuniqué a Housing inmediatamente todas las necesidades que tenía dentro del proyecto e inmediatamente reporté todas las necesidades y me dijeron, ok, le vamos a arreglar, pero señora, llame el 1 de octubre, que el 1 de octubre se les da la calefacción. Correcto, llamé el 1 de octubre y lamentablemente pasó octubre, noviembre, diciembre del año pasado y no tuve la calefacción, pero le volví a insistir todo el tiempo y nunca me mandaron. Le dije que tenía problemas con las palancas de donde se mueven para tener el control de la calefacción. Comuniqué el daño que tenía en el baño y me dijeron para el 10 de julio de este año se le va a separar un appointment. Lamentablemente ahora lo tengo deteriorado el baño, pero yo voy a tener que personalmente hacerlo arreglar porque uno tiene que buscar una mejor condición de vida, es verdad. Si yo sé los problemas que tienen ahora, lo único que yo les quiero decir a ustedes, que tengan un poquito más de humanidad. Recién el 4 de marzo me llamó una señorita a decirme si es que yo tenía calefacción. Pasó 3 meses, pasé con un frío terrible. Si bien es cierto, no compré la calefacción, yo tengo en mi casa la calefacción de corriente de energía normal, pero no la puse porque teniendo 9 ventanas, como le dije en mi departamento, los señores que controlan la luz con Edison, me salían una cantidad exorbitante de luz. Entonces me salía 180 de luz. Imagínense, si yo busco una vivienda económica como la de Housing y tremenda cantidad de luz que me salía, y le dije a los señores con Edison, vengan a mi casa, a mi domicilio, tengo 9 ventanas, yo no prendo luz en todo el día hasta la noche. Entonces me dijeron, señora, hay que ver qué es lo que está pasando. Por eso me abstuve y no puse, tenía que estar cubierta, es verdad, con muchas sábanas y todo el día el frío, y lamentablemente después pasando un fin de semana se nos dañaba la boila y estábamos con agua helada todo el tiempo. Entonces lo único que yo le pido es un poquito más de humanidad, porque en realidad, imagínense, no todo mundo tenemos esa condición económica.
We'll try to respond to some of your concerns.
¿Dónde está?
Sí. Yo estoy en el sector de Park Rock.
Okay.
Park Rock, entonces es lo único que les pido. Sí, mi nombre. Yo vivo en el 232 de Rochester, madre, ahí yo vivo, en el 232 de Rochester, departamento 4A. Sí, e incluso tuve que llamar al 311 para pedir ayuda y me daba mucha pena. Recién el 4 de marzo me llamaron a decirme sí, que yo tenía calefacción.
No sé si usted está...
So I think, couple things just so people know. She's had, as many of you have had, a number of problems in her apartment that she's been going on since October. She has reported them, but people have not come out to fix her needs, deal with her needs. She feels that she can't wait any longer, and because it's taken so long, she's at the point where she wants to have the work done herself, but she obviously feels that that's unfair, that the Housing Authority hasn't responded to the problems in her apartment. She also has an apartment with 9 windows in it. They leak, they're not well insulated, and so she's been dealing with heat outages, and obviously the apartment itself is cold, so she's resorted to using electrical heat in her apartment to heat it. I think she's in a building where she actually pays her electricity, so it's not like many of our buildings. And so she's resorted to not turning on her lights and other things until late in the night to reduce her electric bill because she's spending so much electricity on trying to keep her apartment warm. She's frustrated and she wants somebody to deal with it, and so we're going to come and get your name and understand exactly what your situation is. But obviously her story, I'm sure, sounds like many of your stories, and it's not something that is lost on us, and we will come and work with you to try and deal with that problem.
Said something else that should be translated. She indicated that she's very fortunate that she was able to move into public housing and that she's very grateful for that opportunity because without it, she would not be able to be in New York City.
Sure. Speaker number 8, Beatrice from West Brighton. Mike.
Try now.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good evening. I have 3 questions to ask. The first question, I would like to know the 5-year plan. How do the 5-year plan fit into this the 21 developments and federalizing them? How do the 5-year plan fit into that? The 5-year plan will affect a lot of us in the other 313 developments.
Okay, so we have incorporated the capital projects that we talked about in the 21 developments. They are now part of our new 5-year capital plan that we just adopted. And so all of those projects will be part of the 5-year plan. They will be on, as we publish our 5-year plan, it's on the website. You can get a copy of it that shows all of the capital projects that are planned this year and for the next 4 years afterwards. So all of those will go into the 5-year plan. Additionally, it helps because we receive the money for the federalization.
Excuse me, I don't want my minutes to run out,
okay,
because
well,
I will stop the
but
clock.
because I was going to say, but you asked how it will help the other developments. Because we were able to get the money specifically for the 21 city and state developments, then we have more money in our normal federal capital plan to invest in the traditional federal developments.
Thank you. Now the third one, as you know, exterminators. I live on Staten Island, and there's only one exterminator for all of the developments on Staten Island. I think that's unfair, it's unhealthy, and something needs to be done about that. The other, my question is, I live in West Brighton houses. I would like to know when and where and how long we have to wait for modernization of our bathrooms. Number one, other projects and other developments on Staten Island have gotten modernized twice. We haven't had it once, and we've been there since 1946, and that's not fair.
So I answered the first question. The second one, with respect to modernization, I said it earlier, we can look in the capital plan, in the 5-year plan, and see if there's anything in the plan for interiors in the apartments and in your development. There's a good chance that 9 times out of 10, there's not going to be in the 5-year plan internal major overhauls, although we have made some big investments where we know it makes a difference. For example, a lot of apartments are getting new stoves and refrigerators because appliances we made a priority because of the energy usage that they take up. And by having to spend so much on energy, it's almost $600 million in 2009 alone on energy. If we can just bring that cost down 10%, that's $60 million of money that we can invest in more staff and in other things. So we did make a priority to invest in energy efficient appliances, and we will continue that upgrading process. But in terms of bathrooms and cabinets and things like that, we are trying to repair those things right now until we actually can get to a point where the buildings themselves have been protected. We've had, new upgrading of our instantaneous hot water heaters, boilers, electrical work and things like that. Then we can move on from there to dealing with the things that are not those major systems. So I wish I had the answer you want. We can look and see if it's in the plan, but I don't want to get your hopes up. More likely than not, interior partner work is not on the plan. Exterminator. So exterminators, you're absolutely right. We've identified it, obviously, as a place where we need to make investments in additional personnel. So it's why I've been working with Ms. Finkelman and GM Kelly on increasing the number of exterminators that Nycha has on staff, and right now we're going to get external exterminators to do work in Nycha, but we're actually working on a plan to hire more exterminators internal to Nycha. One of the things we're working on is creating a training program that is absolutely about hiring NYCHA residents to train them in extermination. And so it's an opportunity not only for us to take care of your needs, the pest issues in the buildings, but it's also a great chance for us to give marketable skills to NYCHA residents that can use it not only at NYCHA developments, but out in the market more broadly. So we are focused on exterminating.
Speaker number 9, Patricia Jones, Pink Houses.
Good evening, Chairman Ray and the desk. Thank you for the opportunity for being here. Thank you for everything that you do. Thank you, Margarita Lopez, for the Green Committee. We're doing wonderful. I want to thank my president, Reginald Broman, for always keeping me grounded. I just want to be short tonight to ask 2 questions. Louis H. Pink is already federalized. I would like to know what's coming in for us, as we have a couple of issues that I'm not going to put out here. I don't like to air my dirty linen. But my most concern is our doors. And our biggest problem is the vandalism. And I want to know what you're going to put in place. I know you're getting ready to do a lot of beautiful things. We can't be spending and fixing and replacing and people breaking.
Thank you.
And I want to know what you're going to put in place.
Okay. So for everyone who lives in an existing federal development who's saying, this all sounds nice about the city and state developments, but what's in it for my development or what's in it for me? I want everybody to realize that by getting money directly allocated to the city and state developments, so let me back up. The way we take care of the city and state developments today is we take money that the federal government gives us for the federal developments, and we take a percentage of it away from those developments to support the city and state developments. So by getting the city and state developments their own funding stream, that means the money that's being allocated to us for the existing federal developments can go to the federal developments. So this benefits all of NYCHA, not just for those who live in the city and state developments, because the money that you have been all these years, for the past decade, taking away from your federal developments to support the city and state, we can discontinue that practice. So this helps all of NYCHA. So Pink Houses is helped by the fact that the money we receive to support them will now go to Pink Houses and not to support the 21 city and state developments in general. We still have to do some of that until we get all 20,000 over the hump, but we've got at this point 12,000 as public housing federalized, plus another couple thousand in Section 8, so we're almost there to 100%. So we'll keep pushing on that, but the reality is more money for your developments because we will take less away. The second question about the vandalism and what are we going to do about this issue, I think it may even be in this journal, but we've been working really hard on a safety and security task force that was formed a few months ago, in which the citywide council of presidents, other tenant leaders, as well as tenant patrol participants, the NYPD, where Commissioner Kelly has appointed one of his chiefs to be on the committee. We've gone out to John Jay College, which is obviously an expert around safety, security, and public safety matters. And we've created a committee, and we're focused on how to reduce both crime in NYCHA developments, but vandalism, and just increasing the overall sense of security that residents have by living in public housing. And that committee is doing a lot of hard work. I have to take my hat off to the people who've been working in these committees, Reginald Bowman and John Johnson, and there's a whole team of people who have been around this issue about safety as being paramount in their developments. And I want you to know that we, for example, just last week, a team went out to Newark to look at some of the things that they did around reducing crime and vandalism and installing, both video monitors as well as electronic key card access, where we had Starrett City come and talk about what they do around their safety efforts. We're looking at all of this holistically because we realize that it's not just to put a camera up, it's got to be You know, what's the technology we can put into developments? What kinds of human capital, people, can we put into developments, whether they be security guards, additional people who can focus on keeping your lobbies secure. We're looking at a range of things so that we can actually do this in a smart way going forward. And we will be communicating a lot of what we're working on to you guys as we continue to progress in it. But absolutely, we're going to be coming to you for surveys. Many of you may have already been contacted by your tenant leaders about the surveys that we're looking for you to fill out as it relates to safety in your developments. And we're targeting some of the developments that have high incidences of crime. And we're also trying to compare that to developments that actually have low incidences of crime and try to figure out what are the differences and how do we try to get everybody in a place where they feel confident and comfortable where they live. So we're working on this. It is a priority. It doesn't make sense for us to put millions of dollars into something that people are going to tear it up. And we want to be able to not only change behavior, but catch those who are destroying our homes so that they can actually be dealt with appropriately.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Dr. John Derek Norville, speaker number 10.
I live in Lincoln Houses, which is a federal development. But you had said something about that this new corporation would buy the buildings, and after a period of time, they would sell the buildings back to Nycha. And that one of the leaders of the corporation, I believe was Citibank or an extension of Citibank. Mm-hmm. What can you say to us after so many years of fears? And I have gone, as many of us have gone, to Albany and to Washington, D.C. to fight for these issues and help fight for the Velasquez-Schumer bill. Mm-hmm. What can you say to us, to the people, to guarantee them of their protection and safeties if there's default? What happens if the Nycha is not able to buy back the buildings, or that there is more and more deficits in which the banks decide to sell the buildings outside to private industry, to private realty? What happens if in order to avoid default, you start to raise the rents till they become market rents? We need to know what protections and what guarantees there'll be against these things happening. There used to be public housing in San Diego, now no more. And last year, at the end of the year, there were people at Section 8 vouchers who, because Washington got a little moody, didn't pay up the monies that should have been there, their vouchers were worthless. So we're asking about guarantees and protections, because even though I don't live in a state or city development, if they start to unwind, then we in the federal developments are next.
Okay. So we've worked very hard, as I said, early in this presentation about things that we had to have assurances on in order to move forward with this plan. So the first thing we said is that they had to be preserved as public housing going forward. And that is in the contracts of the partnerships that have been created in the new corporation, the new entity that you talked about. It says that these buildings have to be preserved as low-income housing, as public housing, as you know it. And so that is, they cannot change to become market rate housing or in the future, because as part of the partnership contract, they must be maintained as low-income public housing. It also says that and this is where the tax credit equity, the money that's coming into the transaction, actually is consistent with what everybody in this room wants, which is the preservation for low-income residents. Because by taking the tax credit equity, in order for the Citibank to get the benefits, the tax deductions that they get, it is because they are making an investment in low-income housing tax credits. They get those tax credits because they're committing to invest in low-income housing. So it has to remain low-income housing in order for them to get their tax benefits. If Nycha or anybody were to try to do something that actually made it market rate, it actually would have a problem with the low-income tax credits benefits that they're receiving. So in an interesting way, Citigroup has become one of your most important allies in ensuring that we do not try to do anything to make it become market rate housing, because they would lose the benefits that they receive. They don't receive any money from the rents you pay. right? The money you pay in rents go to operate the buildings. The only benefits they receive financially is they get tax breaks for making an investment in a low-income community, which is a NYCHA development. So that's how they get their benefits, federal tax breaks, in order to encourage them to invest in low-income communities. They also get what's called Community Reinvestment Act credit, which says that they have to make a certain amount of loans or do business with low-income communities. And so they get the benefit of being able to invest and get Community Reinvestment Act credit. So in one way, the bank and their motivation to receive the tax benefits is consistent with your need to keep them as low-income housing, in addition to the fact that the contracts say they have to be maintained as low-income housing. There's something that's called a deed of trust, which means it's a contract that basically governs transferring of these properties into the partnership. And that deed of trust states very clearly it must be maintained as low-income housing. Secondly, I told you that the requirements going forward for somebody to move into these developments haven't actually become easier for higher income residents to move in. It's become tougher. Because right now, if you're at 80% of the average median income in the area, you qualify for public housing. Going forward, to move into these 21 city and state developments, you can't have more than 60% of the average median income in order to come into these buildings. So we've actually made it tougher to be accepted into public housing as it relates to your income. So that's part of a protection that's here. And there are others that basically ensure that these buildings will be maintained as public housing. Now, you asked about what happens in 15 years. In 15 years, when the tax benefits expire, meaning they've gotten all the benefits that they've been promised for making this investment in public housing, we don't have to get rid of the partnership. We can keep this partnership in place, and we can use it again to raise more money in the form of low-income housing tax credits in order to do more investments in these buildings. But what we have, if we want, NYCHA has the right to buy the buildings back, to dissolve the partnership, and just re-own them the way we've historically owned them, with the federal money still coming on an annual basis to the tune of $75 million to support the operations of these buildings. Or we could decide to keep the partnership in place and to raise more money to invest in these buildings. So the thing to keep in mind is that NYCHA has the right to buy these buildings back. We don't have to buy them back from the partnership because the partnership, the way we've structured it, works. We can let the partnership go on forever without it necessarily causing NYCHA any problems. We're still the managing operator of these buildings. We're a partner in controlling these buildings. NYCHA employees will continue to do all the work. We get the money from the federal government to support them. So we just structured it in a way in which if we decide we want to dissolve the partnership, we can repurchase the buildings and have the partnership go away. So we are not concerned about that. We also have debt on these buildings, which is a NYCHA. NYCHA basically has lent money to these buildings because in order for us to move them into the partnership, we had to sell them to the partnership at fair market value as a low-income housing unit. And that was money that the city group provided to us in the form of the tax credit equity. And then we also took back a note, which means they owe us money in order, the partnership owes NYCHA money. So no one can buy these building houses from under us unless we were prepared to have them pay us back this huge loan that we've made to the partnership. So NYCHA can buy these buildings back for a very small amount of money, whereas for someone else to come in and try to buy these buildings, and we have the first right to buy them anyway, or if someone else wanted to come in and try to buy these buildings from the partnership, they would not only have to pay back the tax credit equity and all the exit taxes, but they would have to pay NYCHA all the loans that we've made to these buildings, which makes it very, very difficult for anyone to make the deal work, since they have to keep them as low-income housing even after they buy them. So there's a whole lot of reasons why we feel highly confident that the way we've structured this deal protects each and every resident in this room.
Joseph Garber, Independent Towers.
Good evening, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, and members of the dais. My name is Joseph Garber from Independence Towers. I agree that federalization is a step in the right direction, and let me publicly state, Mr. Chairman, you're the most brilliant tactician and a master of promoting innovative finance that I've ever met. I would love to be in a graduate course with you if you ever gave one. On page 19 of your City Council testimony, I'm curious to know how would you increase the revenue through improved collection processes, and what are those collection processes? I'd like to be on the public
Safety Task Force. I have broad experience from different vantage points. On page 9, you indicate you have to improve transparency and communication, and I realize communication is a very, very, very serious problem, and improve resident services. An idea to improve resident services, I would humbly suggest that the management and customer relationship systems be transferred out under the aegis of DGM Finkelman and placed under your direction. Since management and customer relationship systems is not only under the portfolio of DGM Finkelman, but it has broader connotations throughout the whole agency. So I think that is a step in the right direction. How can we save money? We're losing money by illegal parkers who don't pay either $75 per year or $150 per year. Lights burning in the daytime is a continuous problem, and it's not really resolved. Now, especially that on March the 13th, we moved the clock over. Tonight, I'm going to go check to see what time the lights went on. Dead people paying rent. We have illegal people, and I can take you and show you mail directories as well as intercom directories that have people who passed away still listed. And this shows there's a complete cover-up, especially in Independence Towers, Taylor White, and Williams Plaza. Illegal squatters, underreported income, exposing Nycha to excessive torts by not repairing concrete and asphalt as well as exterior sidewalk, using the 30 cubic foot dumpster for not for bulk but for garbage bags and for boxes. And in Commissioner Lopez, once again, I find doors, nice wooden doors that the maintenance staff throws in the dumpsters. And I recall you said they can be used for salvage. I think somebody has to issue a memo. And Mr. General Manager, I really enjoyed reading that we have to go to basics. And I will help you go back to basics. But unfortunately, not everybody's on the same page. And I expect no retaliation for tonight's comments. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Garber, we've been nothing but nice to you. I'm not sure there was a question there, so thank you. And a very definitive statement. Thank you.
Reginald Bowman, Citywide Cop Chair.
Did we skip you?
You're next.
Okay, what's your name?
Can I yield my time to this young lady?
Would you like to yield your time?
Yes, I'll yield my time.
Mr. Bowman will yield his time to you. And
I will yield my time to you.
Don't worry, he'll get some time. He's being a gentleman. He'd like you to go first.
Hi, my name is Casey Diaz. I'm speaking here on behalf of Columbia University student body. Number one, I'd like to say that I have some questions, and can you please hold any responses until I'm finished? Number one, where is there a list of the 21 buildings and this presentation that you quickly speeded through after you said what you wanted to say? Okay, I'm going to skip the numbers. I feel like there are a number of really important things going on, and people are kind of saying what they need to say, but it's dancing around the biggest, most important issues. This is more than just tenants and maintenance problems. This is about the future of New York City. This is about what's going on. These policies aren't just going to affect us. We are a model for the world. Reforming requirements is not an answer. It's more about what's not being said. Revitalization does not equal preservation. It often equals displacement. You see it in history. It's happened everywhere. It's happened in the 90s. If you look, people do your research. There are a lot of smart people in this room. So you said, you kind of highlighted reforming income requirements and changing definitions will benefit people and not hurt them. But that's not always true. Redefining these things, now what does low income mean? It's not about the caps, it's about the minimums. It's about the people. A lot of people have problems with maintenance. And that's one of the biggest things, maintenance and elevators. That's one of the biggest things that came up here tonight. But, to do these repairs for the, you said it takes about 2 years, it needs to be done in 2 years. To make repairs like this, if you have a sink, that you need to replace, an elevator's not working, walls in your apartment are leaking, there are rodents. How are you going to repair these things with people still living there? You're not. You're going to either, one, fix the ones that no one is living in, or two, make people leave temporarily or possibly, you know, they may not be able to come back. People don't always have somewhere to stay. And even if you do set them up, if you set them up in somewhere that's like an hour away from where they work or where they live now, how is that going to help them? So where's their low income definition? Like, where can people find these kind of things? I don't feel like this is something readily available or known about. Yeah, like what? And also, there's like the issue of whether or not this has happened. Other Chicago people, look up Chicago, Robert Taylor homes. This has happened. They took low income housing and converted it, and they quote unquote converted it and made it so that the original 5,000 residents lived in these buildings, approximately 15 to 20 buildings, similar situation. 200 units were converted for low income people. The rest of it was, let's say, middle income. I think you were able to buy in for $100,000, $200,000, but that doesn't, you know, that's not very attainable for most people. And
Casey,
even then,
we're going to try to respond to some of your questions.
Hello? All I can stress is that it's very important, and it's very important to kind of find out and ask questions about what's going on here. And I'm sure everyone in this room greatly appreciates what you've done. It's just important that you don't sacrifice the few for the greater. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I appreciate all of our comments. I want to be clear. I started tonight saying this is not the first time we've been meeting with residents. And it's not the last time we're going to be meeting with residents. And just to take you back, you know, we started this process by meeting with the Citywide Council of Presidents. We started this process by meeting with CSS, the Community Service Society of New York, by meeting with Legal Aid, by meeting with DC 37 and the unions, and Local 237 in the unions. So with all of the elected officials who you have all elected to represent your interest throughout the city of New York, we've gone through exhaustive questions from them about why are we doing this, what protections do you have as residents, why should they trust us. We've been working on this now for the better part of 6 months. We've had multiple town halls with the residents of Nycha. We've had town halls with the residents of the 21 developments. You know, when I initially did it, you know, via a teleconference and a video where I answered over an hour and a half worth of questions. I've been making individual visits to the developments. I think I've been through 8 of them so far, and we will get through all 21 of them to talk about the issues affecting their development specifically, as well as to explain the federalization. So there's been a lot of meetings, and we will continue to have them until people feel like they understand exactly what it is that we're doing and exactly what it is we're not doing. This is not Robert Taylor Homes in Chicago. We are not selling public housing to individual people. Okay, Robert Taylor Homes was basically allow people to buy the units and turn them into home ownership, and for people with different incomes to buy them. Number one, we're maintaining these as permanently affordable. I'll define it in a minute. And secondly, they are being maintained as rental, low-income public housing rental properties. We're not selling units to people and turning them into condos. Okay, that's not what they did in Chicago, and that's something we are not pursuing here. Now, let me talk about the 21 developments. Bayview, Boulevard, Bushwick, Independence, Linden, Marlboro, Williams Plaza, Baychester, Castle Hill, Marlboro Hill, Murphy, St. Mary's, 344 East 28th Street, Amsterdam Addition, Chelsea, Drew Hamilton, Manhattanville, Rutgers, Samuels, Wise Towers, and Stapleton. Those are the 21. We've communicated with each of the people in those 21 developments. We put stuff under everybody's door individually, explaining that their building was being federalized and what federalization meant. And we've had, as I said, individual meetings at those developments, and we will continue to have those meetings. We've invited the TA leaders and the RAB leaders from each of those buildings to Nycha at 90 Church Street and 250 Broadway, and we've gone through exhaustive Q&As with the leaders of the resident advisory boards, in addition to the citywide council of presidents who we've met with multiple times. So we will continue these meetings. We've been having these meetings of your duly elected leadership. We've been meeting with residents individually, and we've been meeting with you collectively in forums like this, and we will continue to make trips out to each of the 21 developments as we can over the next coming weeks to ensure that everybody's had a chance to have their questions answered. No displacement. I don't know how many times I can say it. I want to make sure everybody understands. We're not asking anyone to move out of an apartment in order to facilitate the construction work that we're proposing. One of the reasons why we're not going into the apartments, in addition to we need to focus on the major systems first before dealing with apartment issues, is because we know we cannot get this work completed in 2 years if we have to go into individual apartments and ask people to move out. One of the fundamental criteria we had to make this investment work, and we got HUD's approval on, is to do work on systems in your buildings that do not require anybody to leave in order for us to commence the work and complete the work. So anybody who's saying, you know, you're going to displace residents, it's not happening. I'll say it again, it's not happening. Income requirements. Income requirements in public housing are 80%. They're very clear. It's on the website. Go on the website. There's so much information on Nycha's website about definitions of affordability and exactly what low income is, and it's not some amorphous term. It's very specific, and it says that if you are at 80% of the area median income, then you can qualify for public housing based upon your income. What I said tonight is that the restrictions or requirements will only get more, the test will only be harder. You can only now be 60% of the area median income, which means if area median income is, you know, $20,000, then you normally now you can make up to $15,000. Am my math right? Yes, I got my math. No, $18,000 in order to be in. It's going to go down now where you can't make more than $16,000. So what's happening here is not in any way relaxing the standards about low income and affordability. It's actually making them tougher. So to anyone who wants to talk about this, I'm happy to stick around. I'm happy to answer more questions on this because this is the most important thing I can answer. But the income requirements are clearly defined. They're on the website, and they are only going to go in one direction, which is to make it tougher. Last question that you had, you talked about, again, the definition, you know, middle income, low income. Right now, 30%, no more than 30% of your income goes to pay your rent. That will not change as a result of federalization. And many of you who are in a flat rent situation, you know, don't even have an impact of the 30%. You're paying less than 30%. Some of you are paying as low as 18% of your income as rent if you're in a flat rent situation. So no more than 30% of your rent, of your income will go to pay rent to live in public housing in these 21 city and state developments that are now federal, just like in all the other federal developments. So I don't know if I got all, I think I got all your questions. You can follow up. It doesn't change. It doesn't change for the residents in this room. People in this. No, but this is. Okay. This is not about homelessness right now. This is about protecting and preserving what we have for the benefit of residents who are there and for future low-income residents. For future low-income residents in New York, and the information is all available. It is not being, you want it, you can go tonight and pull it off the website.
We have a number of questions to get through. Thank you very much. Mr. Bowman?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to encourage everybody to be patient because if you have noticed, everyone is trying to answer everyone's questions. And it is certainly an inclusive process, and we want to bring everyone in on the dialogue so that we can make sure that everybody's questions are answered. No, we're not finished yet.
No, you have to write the question down, ma'am. If you want us to answer your question, write it down and we will answer it. Okay. Next, Hugh.
Okay.
Oh, next. Please, Mr. Bowman.
Yes.
Your question.
Thank you very much. First of all, for those of you who don't know, I'm Mr. Reginald Bowman, and I'm the chairman of the Citywide Council of Presidents of the Tenant Associations of the New York City Housing Authority. And thank you. And I just want to make a brief statement tonight because this process of federalization that has gone on in the last few years was a very important process, and a very important historic moment took place this morning when the Secretary of HUD signed the documents that made the federalization process a reality. And I think that as residents that all live in public housing, you need to understand that we are not trying to do away with or ignore the things that have gone on here in the New York City Housing Authority. And we certainly know, and I live with you, I'm one of you, we know that this has been a long process, and we also know that there's a lot of work still to be done. But that being said, we cannot ignore the reality of the fact that after years and years of waiting for the funding to come through, it did come through, and I'd like to publicly thank John RHEA and the New York City Housing Authority Executive Board and their staff for doing such a good job in making this federalization process a reality. So let's give them a round of applause. The second thing I'd like to do is to publicly thank the Citywide Council of Presidents, my group that is here. Is any of my council here? They are? Who's here?
Ms. Bergen's up
Ms.
there.
Bergen's up here. Thank you, Ms. Bergen. I'd like to publicly thank them for their support. I'd also like to publicly thank President Obama for putting the money into the budget for public housing after years and years of the federal government ignoring what has been going on in our developments and shortchanging us year after year. It was a reality that there was no money in Washington. It was a reality that there was no money in the state, and the president, when he got elected, kept his promise. This new deal that has been put together is a good deal because last year at this time, we had no money for the city and state developments. Now this year we have more than $300 million and a $65 or $75 million windfall that's coming in to fill that big budget gap that has happened in this city year after year. So let's look at it this way. Empty hand, half full hand. Which one do you want? So we did a very good job in making sure that this was all a success at this point in time. I just want to close with this because in listening to everyone, I know that it's frustrating because we all have different issues that go on in our developments day to day, and sometimes these big successes are overwhelmed or covered up by our day-to-day lives. And to the young lady who was just asking the questions, we got to make sure that we're not ignoring you and we listen to the younger generation, but we want to establish something that hasn't been happening for a while in the New York City Housing Authority, which is a continued working partnership between all of the people who are involved and all of us as residents, as leaders, as elected officials, and as executives. The only way that we're going to really solve these problems is by continuing these kinds of dialogues and by also making sure that we make a commitment to work together to make these things come off the paper and become a reality in our homes and in our developments. So, did we solve all the problems in one day? No, we did not. That's impossible, and no practical leader is going to tell you that. but we did make a giant leap forward in history. We created a model for preserving the places that we live for the next generation. Hopefully we'll have a dialogue in the future about making public housing in New York a landmark that will be preserved forever. But we did make steps in the right direction, and we've been brought to the table as a part of the process as residents. So let's take away from this experience something positive and something that we can look forward to and continue this process and celebrate this victory, because we made history in New York and history in this nation because federalization became a reality for all of the developments in the public housing portfolio, and now we have a lot more work to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, the board, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. No. So I want to thank Reginald Bowman for his tireless work and what we've been trying to accomplish here. But before we move on with a couple more questions, there are two members in our audience that I actually want to acknowledge and see if they wanted to say something. That's Councilmember Robert Jackson and Councilmember Chen. I don't know if either of you want to say a few words, but we appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you. And good evening, everyone. Let me just say that as an elected official representing two of the developments that are part of the 21, the Drew Hamilton houses and Manhattanville, and as an elected official that represents Northern Manhattan, I've been involved in several forums where the chairman and other members have been, and also the staff have met with me directly and briefed me, and I'm all in favor of this. And I came here tonight to hear what you had to say, to see if some of the questions and the concerns that you have are being answered. And the most important aspect that I've said all along is that we need to make sure that everything is transparent so you can see it, and everything has to be accountable. And so when everything is transparent and accountable, knowing that these 21 developments are going to get some repairs that they need to be done, because quite frankly, you know, the city of New York and the state of New York has been deadbeat dads to these 21 developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Jackson. And thank you for your support and help as we've worked on this.
Yes, I'm just here also to really listen to the resident. Rutgers Houses is in my district, and I'm the newly elected council member, but I'm really looking forward to working with you, Chairman RHEA, and all the commissioner, to really reaching out and letting every single resident in my district know about this program and how we can work together to really finally get those elevators fixed, get the repairs done, and make it a better living condition for every resident and preserve public housing in the city. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
And also, Councilmember Brewer, Councilmember Gail Brewer was here for, earlier as well, but I saw that she left about 10 minutes ago.
Next speaker, Glendale Singleton, number 13.
She here?
She here?
Yeah. No? Okay.
This looks like a Faith Shillman, okay.
Okay. Mr. Ray, welcome to New York City Housing Authority in our city.
Thank you.
And thank you for being part of the fixed income part of Barclay Bank before. Your resume is most impressive. I hope you live up to it. And Margarita Lopez, thank you very much for chairing the Disability Committee when you were in the City Council. I refer with great joy to the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, federal and local governments. And I thank you, and I also say to you that we have to be in compliance with Section 504 of Public Law 93-112, the Rehabilitation Act, non-discrimination on the basis of disability and federally assisted programs. I used to work for Mayor Koch, for President Ronald Reagan, and for Borough President Howard Golden back in the 80s. I was an appointee, and I had a number of things that I had to do in order to help persons with disabilities in various capacities at a time when nobody really cared before the Americans with Disabilities Act. I had many disabled members in my family who had serious problems, and I found a way of helping others as a social worker and a public administrator. I do want to remind you that these are things that are civil rights, and people with disabilities have long been thrown into institutions that they did not want to be in, and we are in independent living when we have a home to live in. You are not utilizing certain things that can be helpful to you. As an example, you are now making separate corporations. If each apartment is a separate corporation, they can use Section 190 of the Internal Revenue Service Code to get $35,000 in retrofit money to retrofit any building or any part of their apartment to be accessible to persons with disabilities. You have a technology capability as well. You now have Title III funding for labor, in other words, for people to learn employment skills. Unfortunately, they are not accessible. I've asked about the computer skills at Baruch Housing. They are not accessible to people in wheelchairs. I asked, is there a wheelchair bathroom? There is no wheelchair bathroom. If we wish to get employment skills, we are not included in that plan. I don't know why. Persons who have other kinds of disabilities also are not included in plans such as even in apartments where, let's say, domestic violence women who are in wheelchairs because of the abuse and they're there as intimidated victims. They're not given very special help in the social services that they need and support services. So I'm trying to ask you to please be a little bit more aware of us, of people with disabilities. I had the great joy of dealing with Sean Gallagher, who was in Clinton Hills, Fort Greene area. Back in the 80s, he was a poster child for Jerry Lewis. He was placed as one of the first children in city housing with a disability, and he was one of the first poster children of Muscular Dystrophy Association, which will be having their telethon shortly. Jerry Lewis actually was very pleased that he could be with his family instead of in a state mental hospital where he was placed. He was not mentally ill. He had muscular dystrophy. He was physically impaired. Okay. So please think of us. Please utilize the tax credits aside from the ones that you've mentioned so far. And please include us in your advisory committees. Take the great wisdom of Margarita Lopez, who chaired the Disability Committee in the New York City Council when she was the councilwoman. And please also utilize the various capabilities that are available to you as a resource. We have a body intellect of information to give you and could probably assist you in the future.
Okay. I appreciate that, and there are things that you suggested that we'll look into. I will tell you that first through the leadership of Frederica Wilson, who recently retired, and now through Celeste Segure, who runs our EEO effort, we have a lot of focus on ensuring that public housing is accessible and not discriminatory to people who are living with disabilities. And as part of that, we took a very aggressive approach to ensure that 5% of our housing stock was completely upgraded and made available for people living with disabilities. That's a substantial percentage relative to what we're seeing in terms of residents who have disabilities. And we will continue to monitor that and ensure that we have sufficient housing availability in a non-discriminatory way. But we appreciate that, and we will look into some of the suggestions that you made so we can improve on what we're doing. And Commissioner Lopez is someone who is quite knowledgeable in that area. So thank you.
We have 10 minutes remaining. I'll take a couple more questions. Dennis Jamieson. Is Dennis here? Dennis. Lisa Burris. Lisa Burris. Goals. Almatu Barry.
Yes.
From Fred Samuels?
Yeah, right up here.
Right here.
Can you, where's the microphone's all the way over here, so.
Can we have a mic on this side, please?
Hi, I would like to start by saying that you had an opening remarks concerning certain interpreter services available for certain languages. I felt that there is some people here who live in public housing who are non-English speaking, but they're not Spanish or Chinese or Russian or Polish. And I said that only because I am not from here, I'm from Africa. But I have been fortunate enough to live in this country for many years now to comprehend and express myself in English very well, but not all African people do. And now you have other interpreter services available also for other African languages, and you have some French-speaking people also. I'm saying that only because I do not want those people to come in here and feel left out. But that's not the reason why I picked up the mic to speak. I live in also a public housing, and I have been living in one for 12 years now, never had a paint job done, and I have mold and mildew in my bathroom since I moved in there. It has never been fixed. I have reported this many times, and I have cabinet doors falling apart right now. Every time I have any repairs, I have to keep calling that 718 number, and I have to get frustrated. I have to call the Manhattan Management Office and complain and get very upset before they finally send someone. Sometimes I don't even get that. I have to call the 311 number, file a complaint before someone shows up finally a few days later. Or I will get a letter from the director from the Manhattan Management Office a few days later that say, oh, okay, I contacted your manager from your development and he told me the problem was fixed, just because I am persistent. But it's not fair, because for 12 years living there, never 1 month have I skipped my rent. So I really think that your office should be looking more into what is going on. And when you talked about crime fighting, if you don't have good leadership in those developments, it's not going to be easy to fight crimes, because those criminals do not see a good leadership in the developments to really feel intimidated at first. So you have to really take that into consideration. So this is the reason why I wanted to take the mic and speak, besides the languages. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have someone come and get your information too, Ms. Barry.
Angelice Campbell, number 19.
Yes, hello. I'm happy to be here, and I've listened to you talk about everything that's getting ready to go on for a lot of the housing projects. I live in a rehab that's owned by the city, and I haven't heard anything about what's going to happen with our buildings. I live in the Grampian House, which falls under King Towers, and we seem to be getting the back end. Nobody comes out to see what's going on with us, and I'd like to invite you to come and see the building we live in. We haven't had a paint job in 12 years, and the hallways look horrible. The stairs are falling apart outside in front of the building. We have no rampway for access for handicapped people. We'd like to know where we fit in this plan that's going on. What is there for us?
So as part of King Towers, you're not a city or state development.
We are New York City Housing Authority.
Yes, you are. Absolutely. And what I was going to say is you are part of a federal development, so your development has been receiving its quote-unquote capital and operating subsidies from the federal government. But as I described before, all federal developments have had a portion of that taken away from them to the tune of $90 million every year to support the city and state developments. So the first thing you'll get is that we will stop siphoning money off of your developments in order to support the city and state developments. to continue to invest right there where it belongs, which is in the development that the money was allocated for from the federal government in the first place. So that's the first benefit. I look forward to coming out to your development. I actually have not been there. I've been to King Towers, but I haven't been to the rehab. So I look forward to coming there and seeing it. Obviously, the rehabs are different situations than our traditional developments, and they each present their unique own challenges. So I can't say that I know what the issues are, but I look forward to coming out and seeing.
I'm looking forward to having you.
All right. Thank you. One more question.
Gloria Collins. Gloria Collins, your last question of the evening, ma'am.
There will be people after we finish. Management will stick around. Those of you who have specific issues, please see. Okay, let this question.
Excuse me. Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Gloria Collins. I come from Ingersoll of Brooklyn Housing Development. I just have two questions. One is related to buildings, and that's regarding to repairs. I want to know who will oversee the contractors that does the work in our developments. Presently, our development is going under moderation, and we receive surplus monies to have certain things repaired. However, when the contractors are selected, I imagine they are selected by Nycha, but I want to know what is the limit of their warranty of their work? Because after their work is performed, we have more problems than we had before they came. Far as leakage is concerned, roof repair, this will make the third time again that roofs have been repaired, monies have been put out by Nycha, but the contractor gets off without repairing those problems properly, just come and putting a bandage over it, and we're faced with the same dilemma. That was my first question. My second question, has Nycha considered, this is because of evacuation. We know that housing doesn't have the manpower to evacuate residents in the event, God forbid, there's a disaster. We do not have emergency lightings in our buildings to automatically come on. So I want to know, would Nycha consider placing their called fluorescent lighting strips? They are placed on the stairwells and on the stairwell sidings to indicate that exit, how people get out, in and out of the building. That's a major concern.
On the work, it's very important that we have that feedback and your participation in that process. Ultimately, though, we do select our contractors based upon their ability to do the job and then who bids the lowest cost after they've proven that they have the capacity to get the work done. It's up to Nycha to ensure that that work is brought in on time, on budget, and at the quality levels that are prescribed. So we have the responsibility to do that, and we will work with you all to be aware of the work that's being done. But ultimately, we won't sign off on it if the construction job is not done up to standards. And that's our responsibility to ensure that that happens.
Nycha staff will be here to answer any of your questions. They just come down front. Tonight concludes our town hall meeting. Have a good evening.